Yeah. 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 Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics of the sphere, Working overtime to bring you many stories. Waking up today, the same Labour and Tories. A stage it is, and our part to play is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Belfast Bapcast. My guest tonight is someone who has spent decades inside one of the darkest corners of psychiatry, trauma, dissociation and mind control. Dr Colin A Ross is a psychiatrist, an author, and has done over 28 books, and founder of the Ross Institute for the Psychological just bear with me 1 second. For the psychological trauma, and one of the world's most cited authorities on trauma-related disorders. What makes Dr. Ross' work stand out apart is that he doesn't shy away from the forbidden subjects in the intersection between trauma, government-sponsored experimentation, and his career is testified to that as an expert witness. Run trauma programs in hospitals and examine declassified government projects like MKULTRA, not as a conspiracy, but as documented medical history. Tonight, I want to push into that line between therapy and programming. When does the human mind stop being a patient and start becoming an experiment? So thank you very much for joining us this evening, Dr. Ross, and it's a pleasure to have you on the Belfast Bapcast. First question, so you've written about dissociative disorders.
A lot.
Yeah, quite extensively. So can it also, as it's used as a defense mechanism, but can it also become an access point for control?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a large set of documents supporting that. It's not just an opinion.
Okay. And that has obviously been used in programs then to create sort of Manchurian candidates, or whatever you want to refer to them as.
Yeah, so the book and the movie The Manchurian Candidate came out in the 1950s. The basic plot is Frank Sinatra was the lead actor, and then there's a more recent remake of it. But he was a part of a group of American GI soldiers in the Korean War, and they were going through a zone in Manchuria. This is in the fiction movie. They're going through a zone in Korea. They're captured, and they're taken to a location where Chinese doctors come in and brainwash them, work on them. And one of them is programmed to become an assassin. They go back to the United States. They are trying to live a normal life. And the one guy is, his mother controls him with a playing card. It's either the Jack or the Queen of Hearts or something like that. And that switches him into his programmed identity, where he attempts to assassinate a presidential candidate. So fictional. But in the CIA documents, so MKULTRA started in the 50s. In 1950, the director of the CIA signed into Operation Project Bluebird, which became Project Artichoke, which then rolled over into MKULTRA in 53, 54. And in the Bluebird Artichoke documents, which I got through Freedom of Information Act, there's a correspondence between it from one CIA officer to the other, saying, and this is before the book and the movie, saying that he wants to look into reports that a group of GIs were captured while passing through Manchuria, and some of them have been subjected to hypnotic experimentation. So the plot of the movie and the book is in CIA documents before the book was published.
Yeah, it's based in reality as well.
Yeah.
Very much so. So how much does that cross over into reality? So these trauma-based mind control victims, do they always have a handler and like an activation point, or?
Well, there could be somebody like it's just a serial killer or something, just operating on their own, right? So not every single person who's a killer is going to have a handler, but there's a guy named G.H. Estabrooks who was actually born in Canada, but his career was in upstate New York at Colgate College. And my research assistant went to Colgate and had like boxes of documents she brought back. And so this is all 100% documented. So he wrote 1943 a book on hypnosis where he talks about creating the super spy, which is basically a Manchurian candidate. And then as late as 1971, he was writing about that in a magazine. And I have in my large pile of documents correspondence back and forth between him and J. Edgar Hoover spanning 3 decades. And he invited J. Edgar Hoover's second in command to Colgate College for a conference. And he spoke at military bases and at universities on the topic of the super spy using hypnosis to create Manchurian candidates. And he wrote in detail about you. He didn't say exactly how they were recruited, but it's a military person. They're selected for being somehow susceptible to hypnotic control. And then he didn't say exactly what he did, but he describes these guys being sent on, he didn't say assassinations, but he said retrieving records, infiltration, surveillance missions. And the example is a guy comes in, he does at least several months of programming on him, creates a new identity, and there's an implanted code word or code phrase, which is the moon is clear. So the regular out front guy comes in, G.H. Estabrooks talks to him, says the moon is clear, gives him some documents. He's then brought back to his regular self. The regular self is sent on an assignment to go to Japan with some nondescript documents. He goes to Japan. The military officer on the far end says, "Hi, the moon is clear." He switches to his programmed identity. A response to whatever the classified information is inserted verbally. Back to the United States. Again, the moon is clear. So that's described in detail.
And well, from what I can gather, and from MKULTRA, it went far beyond hypnosis.
Yeah, there's a whole smorgasbord of different things they did. So there's hypnosis, there's hallucinogens and other drugs, sensory deprivation, isolation, brain electrode implants, a lot of different things. And if you look at the Abu Ghraib films, they're using, and this is all public domain information, they're using, so these guys are all Muslim terrorists. They're mocking and even destroying the Quran in front of them, sexually humiliating them, making them do sex acts on each other while they're naked, having a female officer come in and interact with them sexually, dogs threatening to attack them, hooding in a Guantanamo Bay. There's pictures of guys who are hooded, who are in very uncomfortable positions that they have to sit or crouch or stand for hours. So there's a whole variety of food, sensory isolation.
If you were to best describe the fracturing of the mind at the point of trauma, how would you do that? Or?
Well, you run into the problem, which all of mental health psychiatry runs into, which is the brain is so incredibly complicated. and so far beyond our ability to map it or understand it that we don't really know how anything happens exactly. I mean, we basically have no idea whatsoever how a bunch of atoms and electrical signals in your brain generate consciousness. Zero idea. No thoughts about the mechanism or how to test it or how to research it scientifically. So it's the same thing with the mind or the brain fracturing or fragmenting. Exactly how the brain does that, we don't know. But it's not like some science fiction territory way outside normal. It's just kids are playing that they're a superhero or a cowboy or a cartoon character. They're imagining it, they're role playing it. It's an amplification of that normal ability of the mind for an actor to take on a new identity. But when you use fear and all kinds of different scary tactics on the person, the split, the fragmentation gets more intense, more walled off.
And
I'm not sure if that
I,
answers your question.
no, it does. I previously worked in an environment where I dealt with a lot of people who had been in the care system and who had a lot of dissociative disorders, and the differences between the alters can be night and day. It's amazing to actually watch the shift. And how do you go about treating this, and like what?
Well, so the diagnosis used to be multiple personality disorder. Now it's a dissociative identity disorder, which is just the same thing. And the different parts have all kinds of different names. People call them identity states, alter personalities, alters, parts, people. Some people call them my littles or my peeps, or there's all kinds of different vocabulary for these different characters inside. And some of them are very distinct and very separate. And it's like you're talking to a different person. And then I go back to the regular self, and the regular self doesn't remember the conversation you just had. And then it can be sort of distinct and sort of clear and shifting, but you can't really put your finger on it. So it's not always the classical ultra distinct and sharp. Sometimes it's just, okay, this is a shift, seems a little different. There may or may not be amnesia.
And would you say it would be one of the harder psychological disorders to, well, it's probably easier to identify, but harder to clinically treat?
Yes and no. So, and it all depends and it varies from person to person. So in terms of making the diagnosis, it's actually, the reason it doesn't get diagnosed, there's a little set of reasons. One is people are told it's rare, it's bogus, it doesn't exist. And so they don't want to go against their teachers. They don't want to go against the crowd. They don't want to be ostracized because they're diagnosing this crazy disorder. And then they're just not taught what questions to ask. So they don't ask the questions, so they don't make the diagnosis. And that still like dominates the mental health field today. The complete lack of understanding, knowledge, and the bad attitude. So when we get to, but once it's diagnosed, which is not that hard, then we get to treatment. So if you think of just drug and alcohol, or just alcohol, say, there's some people who have a huge drinking problem for a long time. They're really committed to recovery. They go into treatment, they stick with it, they get clean and sober, they stay sober, maybe they have one or two little relapses, but they have long-term sobriety. And then there's other people who are, I don't have a problem. Meanwhile, they've had a bunch of legal charges, they've lost 3 relationships, they've been fired from jobs, their liver enzymes are way up here. So it's the same, quotes, diagnosis or disorder, and it can be either very treatable or completely untreatable. Same with most personalities. But if somebody's, I always tell people, if you're motivated, you stick with it, you work hard, there's a really, for real, serious chance of making amazing progress. As long as you're not like homeless or in a huge domestic violence relationship or terminally ill. In the United States, you have to have insurance, and you have to have or money to pay for therapy.
Yeah, it's quite expensive, healthcare in the United States, I believe. A previous point that you'd said there that, nobody really knows, the workings of the mind, and it differs from, patient to patient, and that's as an expert in the field. So the mind is a minefield almost, it's almost like you can't really apply a blanket diagnosis or framework to these things, because it differs from person to person so much, but you sort of have to have rough guidelines. Or
basically, yeah, but if you just compare that to cancer, right, there's a bazillion types of cancer. It can be all different locations in the body. You can have a minor skin cancer that just a little minor procedure, it's gone forever, all the way to pancreatic cancer that's untreatable and you die in a month. So it's the same thing with mental disorders. They're very varied, but it's not just chaos. So, and all these diagnostic criteria, there's not medical tests for them. You can't do a blood test or a brain scan. It's all based on self-report, subjective experience, and observing the person's behavior. So it's all descriptions of behavior. So it can be clear that somebody meets, okay, they have maybe 2-3 times a week or 2 or 3 times a month, sudden spike of anxiety that goes from 0 to 100. They stay up there for 5-10 minutes and they're sort of down to 80, and then an hour or 2 later they're back down to maybe 20. So that's a panic attack. And the symptoms include being really, really anxious, heart going fast, hyperventilating, sometimes short of breath, racing thoughts, a lot of fear, stomach churning. If you hyperventilate, your fingers can be numb and tingly. So there's a whole list of symptoms. And some people have these 3 symptoms, but not that one, or these 4 symptoms, but not that one. So it's not exactly the same, but it's a pretty consistent pattern.
And is it a case of treating symptoms and never really treating the root cause? Or
well, most of the time in psychiatry is treating symptoms. So nobody claims that antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers cure anything. Everybody agrees that they just control symptoms. But in psychotherapy, with multiple personality dissociative identity disorder, I personally, and lots of people in the field, have seen somebody work, and gradually all these parts get de-differentiated, blended back into one person. And then they're not having chunks of time they're missing. They're not coming to somewhere and they don't know how they got there. People are not telling them about stuff they've done that they don't remember. They're not finding things other than just like a pen or something, but they're not finding whole sets of clothes or major objects. They don't know how they got there. Stuff is not going missing all the time. They're not hearing voices arguing inside their head. All that just goes away. It's not happening anymore. And they have a subjective sense of, yeah, I'm blended back into one person. So that's, and it doesn't come back next month or next year. That definitely.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
And then some people don't want to get all blended back into one. They just want to get to where all the parts are aware of each other. They're basically a friendly team. There's no chaos. They're not trying to kill each other. They're not having all this horrible behavior. And life is okay.
So some might see these things as almost demonic entities, like possessions, and being comfortable with them all being symbiotic. Is that really a good idea? Would the first option not be the most desired outcome? Work towards complete clearance
So I live in Texas, which is the Bible
Bible
Belt.
Belt, yeah.
A lot of fundamentalist people who believe it's literally demons. And I actually published a couple of papers on people with multiple personalities whose exorcisms haven't worked. And oftentimes, if you try an exorcism on somebody with multiple personalities, what happens is you try to get rid of a part, but it's not actually an external demon, it's an angry part of the person. And so, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to be twice as angry, twice as hostile, hate the church. And those are the kind of outcomes you see. Whereas if the so-called exorcism is much more negotiated, discussed, and looks a little more like therapy, and thank you for being here, and but I really think it's time for you to move on. How about that? And the entity says, okay, I'll leave now. Then you don't get angry, vengeful comeback. You don't get the person alienated from their church. They don't lose all the support. They're not angry at God. So it's still sort of an exorcism, but the outcome is good.
Yeah,
So
I think a lot of people in the Bible Belt community believe that they have powers beyond their, shall we say, calling, and like exorcisms, etc., are being performed by people who aren't spiritually capable of it. And as you say, the long drawn out negotiation process is certainly the more desired, because you're allowing the person to understand what's taking place and work through it, and build the necessary barriers to not allow that to creep back in.
And if you take that approach, it kind of, in a way, is irrelevant whether the therapist believes it's a part of the person or believes it's actually something from outside. As long as you follow the steps of the procedure, the outcome can be good.
So you have done a lot of expert witness in courts. I've been called as an expert witness. Quite well, a few cases. Obviously not breaching any sort of confidentiality. Can you give us an idea of what sort of cases they were?
Basically just several categories. One is somebody's suing their father or uncle, whoever it is, many years later. And that's very tough because there's no proof that it actually happened, the abuse. So a handful of cases like that. Somebody suing their therapist for alleged sexual misconduct. And I've been involved in cases where there's no proof, but I've also been involved in cases where the therapist has confessed. So it's for sure it objectively happened. And then it's not disputing what happened, it's what are the damages and how much should the award be. And then, again, not a lot of cases, but cases where the person is alleging that they didn't have multiple personalities. They came into treatment with somebody who was sort of a enthusiast, fanatic therapist who suggested to them they had all these different parts. And then they were maybe admitted to a hospital for like a year or something, which doesn't happen now. And they were just sort of brainwashed and programmed into believing that they had multiple personalities. And then they
that's a very real thing, I'm sure, as well. I'm sure that
it doesn't happen much anymore in America because there's a thing called managed care, which is the insurance company's contract with a managed care company to manage the insurance policy, which is basically not pay for treatment. And so insurance companies don't pay for people to stay in hospitals for a year anymore. So it just doesn't happen anymore. And to have enough control over somebody that you can kind of brainwash them into believing and acting as if they have multiple personalities when they don't, that's pretty hard to achieve with one session a week of psychotherapy.
That's Jim Jones level influence there.
Yeah, cults, that's the same thing with cults. They don't just walk up to somebody and say, oh, how would you like to join the cult and never speak to your parents again and sell flowers.
There's like a grooming process.
Yeah.
And with the likes of a Jim Jones, do you think it's a possibility that he could have been Manchurian candidate, you know.
It's definitely possible. Um, I don't have any evidence that he was or he wasn't, but the place so here he is in California with a small sort of cult organization,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden he decides he's going to move out of the United States because the apocalypse is coming or whatever. So where does he move to? He moves to a former army base in the jungle in South America, which has a whole set of buildings. And the guy who helps with the logistics and the organization of that was an arms dealer for British intelligence. So, and that's not just random.
No, and same as Charles Manson and his connections with probation officer and the institute where MKULTRA experiments were being carried out, and you know, at the same time, I think it was the LSD experiments were going on in that institute, and it was the same times he was doing the LSD experiments within the family as well. And
yeah, there was. This is fully documented that there was psychiatrists cleared at top secret who were administering LSD to all kinds of people as part of the whole mind control program. One of the elements was hallucinogens. And one of the guys
jumped out a window.
Sorry, what?
One of the subjects jumped out a window. Is that correct? After taking the LSD?
That'd be, there's probably more than one person who jumped out of a window. But the famous person is Frank Olson. And he worked in the chemical weapons division of the U.S. Army at Fort Detrick. And he was not 100% documented, but almost for sure he was involved in developing hallucinogens and those kind of experiments on people. But what documented for sure is he was taken to a little retreat outside the Washington, D.C. area. And Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of MKUltra, was there, and he was slipped a dose of LSD. This is according to the CIA. And he had a bad trip, and he came home and was kind of paranoid and upset, and went to see his doctor, who actually was an MKUltra contractor himself. And he ends up at a hotel, the Statler Hotel in New York, and he jumps out the 10th or 12th floor window, whatever it was. And, you know, it's just a horrible suicide. But then it gets uncovered, partly by the family, that actually what looks like it happened is he had a bad LSD trip. He was threatening to become a whistleblower. And so several different named contractors and CIA personnel pushed him out of the window. And one of the guys who, like 95% documented, one of the guys who was there and probably actually pushed him he had a whole series of aliases, one of which was Lafitte, Pierre Lafitte. And he was an arms dealer, some sort of murky intelligence contractor guy. But he was at, in the 1960 to 62 timeframe, he worked at a place called the Riley Coffee Company, which was in New Orleans. And Lee Harvey Oswald worked there at the same time. And Lee Harvey Oswald had another set of identification with a pseudonym. And his fake last name was the same last name as one of the fake identities of Pierre Lafitte. So, I mean, it can't be coincidence, right? So
that whole time frame was interconnected and so managed by the intelligence agencies, like the Timothy Leary movement and, you know, all that sort of counterculture movement. Like all the artists seemed to come out of Laurel Canyon and had military followers or military connections in some way, shape, or form.
So there's a web of interconnections, some of which you can document, some of which you can't, some which may just be coincidences, but it's all too much to just be coincidence by far.
Yeah, I mean, how many dots does there need to be before you start to connect them? And I think, like, even the most, let's say, like, anti-conspiracist after the whole COVID thing, now everybody's sort of questioning everything, and there's a lot more people open their eyes to the possibilities of deception at the highest levels. And obviously, you've worked.
So I wrote a series of papers in a really obscure neurology journal in 2020, 21. So right in the heart of the pandemic, all fully referenced, fully documented. So you just use common sense. Okay, so the pandemic really started strong in like February, March of 2020, right? It's going
Yeah.
full on by April. And so before, up until the end of 2019, if you went in a hospital anywhere in the world, people were not walking around with masks on, right? They only wore masks in the in the OR, or maybe labor and delivery, or some specialized rooms where highly infectious person was. But doctors didn't wear masks in their offices or just in the hospital in general at all. And so why not? Well, there's a very good reason. If you look at this normal surgical mask that most people have, and you look at the pore size in those masks, it's 500, it's 50 to 100 microns. That's the size of a pore. And a virus is 0.1 microns. So the pores in a regular mask are 500 to 1,000 times the size of a virus. And aerosols are about 1 micron. So the pores are 50 to 100 times the size of an aerosol. And the only thing that masks are good for is droplets, which are, like you sneeze on somebody, you can see droplets on your skin. A mask will stop that. And that's what they're for in the OR, so blood doesn't splash up, get inhaled, and so on. So I always compare it to, you're concerned that mice are coming onto your property from the nearby woods, so you put a stake in the ground every 40 feet, 12, 13 meters. And the Department of Agriculture says, oh yeah, that'll protect you. It's completely physically impossible that a mask could stop a virus or an aerosol at all. Which is that's why doctors didn't wear them. And in February of 2020, the Surgeon General of the United States stated in public, there's no need to wear masks in public to protect yourself from viruses. 2 months later, they were being mandated with no new research at all. And before the pandemic, there was a meta-analysis, is when you take a bunch of studies and pool them together and look at the overall data. There's a number of meta-analyses comparing people wearing masks to people not wearing masks, and what's the transmission and infection rate. Not a single study showed any protective effect of masks. There's one study during the pandemic in Denmark, no difference between mask wearers and mask non-wearers. So there's actually abundant proof that masks don't protect you at all. But they were
didn't matter.
But then a few years later, the powers that be are going, oh, well, it turns out that masks aren't necessary. And it turns out that vaccines don't actually protect you from either transmitting or getting infected. All they do is reduce the risk of serious illness, hospitalization, death. So the idea that you're going to kill granny if you don't get vaccinated are completely bogus. Which again is just common sense, because the viruses don't just jump from the air into your liver, right? They have to go into your nose, into your lungs. And so
they really relied on our primal instincts of fear at that time, like everything was fear driven.
Oh, totally.
Nobody was thinking straight, apart from obviously a few people, but like certainly older generations were adamant about sticking to the 2 meters and wear your mask, and if you didn't, you were a shame in society. Even though, like, if they had took a moment to sort of look at what they were doing, walking into a restaurant, wearing a mask, taking it off to eat their food, putting it back on to go to the toilet, taking it off again when they come back, like, come on. It was pageantry, and, so many people blindly walked into it, and it was like some form of training ritual, just like obedience. How far gone is society, and how much can we control them?
So that's why, to me, mind control programming, if you call it mind control, it's like science fiction. It's incredibly easy to mind control and program the population. It's not hard at all. As we saw.
Well, that was proven. Yeah, it was proven in 2020. So
what
was singing the same hymn sheet.
What the mind control programs do is they add on some special techniques on top, like hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, all drugs, all these things. But the foundation is just
like with all the events that we've seen throughout history, there seems to have been like a correlation with like a pre-programming in like movies and TV shows and one thing and another. What lies behind that requirement to let you know in advance? What's...
Well, if you find out, please tell me.
It's almost like they've been smug about it, and down to the most minutiae of detail as well,
So a big current example is Jeffrey Epstein. So what do we know for a fact? There's published lists of his airplane manifests, of people who visited the island, all kinds of powerful, rich, international people, clearly a bunch of underage girls being sexually victimized. We know for a fact. Yeah. But how many of these guys have been identified and prosecuted? Like, the lid is on so tight. But we know there's a giant conspiracy going on there.
Yeah, well, every level of the system is controlled by someone, and it's not by chance that these people are able to operate with impunity. And it's with confidence as well. There's a smugness in it. Like if you watch Jeffrey Epstein's police interviews, like he didn't look like a man that was in any way concerned. He just looked like he was having a chat with his chums. In his head, he knew he was getting home and it was protected.
It's in CIA lingo. It's called a limited hangout. That's when you let out a little bit of the truth to cover up the greater truth, and you have a couple of patsies. So, Ghislaine Maxwell goes to jail. Prince Andrew gets accused in public, but none of the big shot American politicians and business guys get named.
Yeah, and I think that's been the case throughout history. Anything that I sort of take it as a rule of thumb, anything that's disclosed to us is masking something else or is for an agenda. It doesn't seem to be that there's anything that's brought to light without purpose. Like why has Jeffrey Epstein dominated the TV screen since 2019? And
he's been distraction is the number one thing, I think.
100%. And anytime there's anything geopolitically going on of any significance, there's new Epstein information, to sort of counteract that. And I think people are getting more wise to it as time goes on, but I mean, still they're able to get the outcomes that they desire. So how do you really counteract against like a mass mind control effort, for example? So now in an age of social media and everybody is connected with smartphones, etc., so everybody's accessible, and as you said, mind control of the masses is clearly possible. So how do you as an individual counteract that?
Just trying to be aware of it and talk about it and document it and educate people, which is sort of like the guy with his finger in the dike, right?
Yeah.
I, as an individual, that's all I can do.
And I mean, even as an expert in the field, the minute you mention mind control and stuff, there is just automatically people triggered who will roll their eyes and, sort of last bit in with conspiracy theory, which was a term constructed by the CIA to, risk to take any question and mask it off as being absolute quackery. But, your credentials speak for themselves, and you're not going to be called as an expert witness if you're not an expert.
Well, odd paradox is that dismissing things as a conspiracy theory was created by a conspiracy theory. It was a deliberate, intended manipulation tactic.
Yeah, I find though, whenever I try to explain that to people, that's when they really think I've lost the plot, But
a nice example is, like, if you did a poll in the United States, how many buildings collapsed on 9/11? Like, I don't know, but 97% of something, but people would say, well, 2 buildings, World Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 2. That's it.
What about WTC 7? Yeah.
So building 7, which was 47 stories high, no plane hit it, but it collapsed on the same day. And so there's a government commission that looks into it, and they conclude that debris from one of the Trade Center 1, 2 hit the building and set furniture on fire inside the building. And furniture on fire caused the collapse of a 47-story building. And then
still structured 47-story building as well, not just a 47 steel structure. It's absolute insanity that.
So then all kinds of people pointed out that steel melts at a far higher temperature than wood and paper burning. So then they came up with a sort of an addendum to the report. It was actually fuel tanks inside the building, and those caught on fire. And then it turned out there were no fuel tanks. And then it turns into, well, the fire caused the weakening of one of the pillars in the corner of the building, which then generated a collapse.
Wouldn't generate a pancake collapse, though, would it? So
when the videos are like public domain documents, you can watch them on YouTube. If you look at World Trade Center 7 collapsing, it collapsed straight down. And there's a guy who did an analysis of the frame-by-frame analysis. And I can't remember exactly, but it was like something like 7 seconds for the collapse in total. And from second 2 to second 5 or something, it was collapsing at free fall. Like just dropping a rock in the air. And so if you blew up the top of the building, like the World Trade Center, well, then it's going to blow up at the top, and then that's going to collapse on the next story, next story. It's going to be like a pancake effect, and it's going to slow down. The only way it can be doing free fall is if it's demolition from the bottom. Yeah. So just the basic physical facts.
Well, that's when you know that it's a complete and utter farce, is when they're like wanting you to not believe your own eyes and not, believe things that are absolutely impossible. We all know that is not something that can happen. Basic common sense would tell you that a plane crashing into the top of the building is not going to, a steel structure is not going to react that way in perfect free fall speed and not affect any of the buildings around it, and then obviously the coincidental insurance policies taken out by Larry Silverstein beforehand, etc., etc. And there was 7 trillion or something that was announced missing the day previous by Donald Rumsfeld, and the bombing at the Pentagon went into that exact part of the building where all the information was held for the investigation of that money. And
Right.
it's just,
It goes on and on and on. And on.
yeah, it's a never-ending circle. And, you know, but that's what I mean. What measures does the average person have to deflect this sort of ongoing narrative-driven programming?
Well, unfortunately, it just keeps going on and on and on. So obviously people don't have weapons. Like, it's the same thing with, like, if I tried to talk to family members who are, you know, educated, intelligent, reasonable people, and I just start in on the face masks story, and I just start saying, like, the pores are 50 to 100 microns, virus is 0.1 micron, and they 3 sentences into it, their eyes have glazed over and they're not listening.
The era of debate is dead. People just now see a difference of an opinion as a personal attack, and it's insane. You know, you can't just have a discussion about things anymore. And as you say, the minute you mention anything COVID related, there's a certain group of people that are just programmed to shut down and just shut you down as well. You know, you're automatically mental, or you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever. But I mean, the data's the data, you know.
And so the Manchurian candidate's the same thing. There's actually, like, the book I wrote about it called The CIA Doctors, 100% based on documents. No, somebody told me, no, I read online. 100% based on documents, completely objectively documented. And still, it's conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like anything, and to be honest, it's a case of those with the eyes to see are meant to see, and you know, if that's the case, that's the case. You know, if you want to remain blind to the truth, that's entirely up to yourself. You know, I used to get very frustrated trying to wake people up, or whatever you want to call it. I couldn't really care less anymore. All the information's there. if you wanna find it for yourself. Do you think there's currently, I know it's just conjecture, but people are just sort of waiting to be activated at some point currently in society? Not necessarily in America, but from these sort of programs, because I don't think that MKULTRA really ever stopped, or that.
Well, my take on that is, if MKUltra, which turned into MK Search, which turned into who knows what, if all that was stopped, the CIA and military intelligence agencies would not be doing their job. You've got to have expertise on that. You've got to at least have counterintelligence way of detecting and defending against that, even if you're not running it offensively yourself. So I just don't think the CIA and military are that incompetent. They better not be. So it's got to be going on. It's just like, we're not developing satellites anymore. Wait a minute. How are we supposed to be safe if you're not even developing satellites? Or we're not developing AI, or we're not developing microchips, or
all these things are just such uncharted territory as well. You know, artificial intelligence, and it's a quandary in itself as to what degree it will go to. It's been fantastic, obviously, having the chance to speak with yourself this evening. I'm not going to take any more of your time, and I have to, but where is best for people to get in contact or follow your work, or get your books?
Almost all my books are on Amazon. And if you live in Europe, I mean, I have books, physical copies of my books that you can order from me. But if you're in Europe, then I have to pay like this enormous shipping rate, right? So shipping the book to you costs 2 times the cost of the book. Whereas if you order from Amazon, first of all, they give you a discount and don't pay me the full price. But then they've got cheap shipping, right? Because they've got so much volume. So really, you should go to Amazon and just look up.
Yeah, it makes it's almost impossible not to use at times. You know, it's
It is.
in this day and age a necessary evil, especially for the book world.
And I have, so you can go to my website, which is, it's short for the Ross Institute. So ROSSINST.com.
If you sent me all that in an email here after we finish, I'll get that put up, and in the description I'm going to put the show live later on this evening. So I'll get all the details in the description. So thank you very much for joining us. If anybody has liked the content, just please like, share, and subscribe. And this has been the Belfast Bapcast.
Yeah. 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 Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics others fear, Working overtime to bring you many stories, waking up today the same labor and Tories. A stage, it isn't our part to play, is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.